Hello friends! In this video I'm going to teach you how to use the pattern starter that's included in the Folksy Florals templates. For this tutorial you're going to need Procreate to draw your florals on the template, as well as Photoshop and Illustrator where we're going to be finishing off the pattern. This is the way that I make patterns. You may have learned a different way. If you have a different way of doing it, by all means do it your way. But this is how I create all of my seamless patterns that I then use to turn into fabric or pattern papers or anything else you can stick a repeat pattern on. All right, let's get going. To start off this tutorial, we're gonna open one of the pattern starters. I'm choosing pattern 1 and I'm going to click the Procreate file. That brings it right into Procreate for me. The first thing you want to do is decide how big you're wanting your final pattern to be. So if we go up to here to the little wrench and then hit canvas information, it tells us that this square is 5 inches by 5 inches. If that sounds like that's the perfect size for you, then great. That means that this square is more like 4 inches by 4 inches. You want to create your pattern a little bit bigger than you think you want your final pattern to be, just in case you need to scale it a little bigger or a little smaller. Since this isn't a vector program, it's a raster program, whatever size you start with is as big as you ever are gonna wanna go, because otherwise you're gonna start getting pixelated and the quality is gonna go down. So always start a little bit bigger than you think that you want, so you have that ability to scale it. You can always scale it down, but you can't very easily scale it bigger. So I'm just gonna keep it as is. If you wanted to make yours bigger, you could. So we're going to take the opacity down on this template, add a new layer, bring that layer underneath the template, and we can start drawing now. You're gonna wanna start drawing on the top left corner flower. The reason for this is that because we want to make this a repeat, I'm gonna turn up that opacity so you can see it a little better. As you can see, this flower is also this flower. Those flowers are also these flowers. They're repeated around the edges of this square. That's how you get a seamless repeat for, say, fabric or a patterned paper, or to go around a mug, or all those different products you can find on places like Society6 or Redbubble, where there's a repeat pattern that you can't see any seams in it. This is how you create that, is by having each edge be able to match up with each other. So we don't need to draw this flower 4 times, we just need to draw it once. And so I have you draw everything along this edge, everything along this edge, and then anything that's in the middle that isn't touching an edge. Those should be the only flowers you need. The rest will be able to be repeated later in the process. Even some of these middle ones could be repeated. So you can kind of see that this flower looks like this flower. So this one could be repeated and made into that one later. Same with this flower, could probably be that one. This flower could be this flower. So you can decide at how in depth you want to get on how many different versions of these flowers you create. But we're gonna start off in this top left corner and do the top and the side first. So let's turn back down the opacity. And on our first layer, choose a color palette. So I'm choosing the Moroccan Floral color palette that's available in the color palettes with the templates for Procreate. I'm gonna set that as my default, go back to my disc, and I'm gonna start drawing some of these flowers. One thing to keep in mind is that later in the process, each of these flower groupings is going to have to be its own image when we take it into Photoshop. So if you have a bunch of if you only have one layer that has all of your different pieces on it, you'll just have to know that later in Photoshop, you're gonna have to cut those out from the layer and separate them into separate layers. Or you can just start off from right now, making your flowers be one flower per layer. Whatever works best for your workflow. have this one flower bundle or bouquet done, that means I can use this one for right here, for right here, for right here, and right here. So that's the only one I need to draw. So I'm going to go ahead and group all of these. I'm not going to flatten them yet, just in case I decide I want to do something different with them later, but I am going to group all of them and start a new layer. And now I'm going to move on to the next flower, which is this one. Okay, now that second grouping is done. An important thing to think about when you're creating patterns is, these are complementary. That's going to be a really bright pattern because I'm using all of these different colors. But now as I go on to create more, I want to make sure that I have some repeat elements. So I might want to use this yellow flower somewhere else for one of these single circles. Or same with this blue flower, or here I repeated that circle with the little stem and the little circle flowers just in a different color. I may want to use this flower for a shape like that or like that. That makes your overall pattern feel cohesive and makes it so you don't have to think as much either as you're creating more shapes. If you want to just go ahead and make a super crazy pattern where every single flower is different, that's also super awesome. So it really just depends on your preference. For me, I like to keep some of these elements and repeat them throughout the pattern so that it feels cohesive throughout. So I have this shape here that would be my next one if I'm going down the line on this left side. But I also have a similar shape that's right here that's bigger. I want to draw it bigger rather than smaller because I can always scale that down in Photoshop to be this smaller one, but it's gonna look pixelated and a little strange if I take this larger one and make it, or if I take this smaller one and make it larger. So instead of drawing this one on the side, I'm gonna do this one in the middle and not worry about doing this one, knowing I'm going to copy and paste it and scale it down in Photoshop. Oh, and I'm also going to group these and start a new layer. That bundle is done. I'm going to group those layers together. And now I can move on to the next one. So this one is taken care of right here. This one is taken care of up there. So I'm going to move this way now. And I have this little oval. That doesn't mean that your flower necessarily needs to be an oval. It could be a circle, it could be a little stem of something, it could be a leaf, whatever you want. It's just a placeholder. So I think I'm going to take this blue flower and kind of replicate it up here. Okay, that flower is done. Group them together and move on to this flower. I also want to look again to make sure that this grouping doesn't show up somewhere else bigger, which it does. It shows up right here bigger and it shows up right here bigger. So I'm gonna go, oh, and actually I lied, look, we already did that one. That one's gonna go right there. So that might change what I want to do. I could do a brand new flower right here that even though this is that same shape, I could do with the circle, the two little branches and the two leaves, shape, two branches, two leaves. I could do something new here, or maybe I change up where I want to put this little blue flower since this one could be right here. For the sake of this, I think I'm gonna just do another new flower collection right here so that I have something new to work with to copy and paste throughout so that we don't have this blue flower collection here, 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 and here. That's kind of a lot of places to have one shape. Okay, that one is ready to go. So I'm going to group these together. And as I'm looking at this, there's a lot of empty space here and not a lot right here. So I'm not gonna worry about that right now. I'll have time to space things better when I get into Illustrator. I'm not gonna worry about that right now. I'll have time to space things better when I get into Illustrator. Okay, so now we have this little guy with just two leaves coming out. Gonna start a new layer and get drawing. Okay, that one is done. I can group those layers. And now I actually have both of those sides completed, which means I also have both of these sides completed. Now I want to look in the middle and just make sure that there isn't anything in the middle that isn't able to be copied and pasted from up here. So this one can go here, we're good on that. This one or this one could go here, so we're good. This one is going to go right here. This one could go here, oops, or here or here. That one could also be spaced out throughout. I may want to do just a few more little ones like this to fill in the spots so that it's not only this blue flower and this yellow flower filling in all of the little circles that are floating in the middle here. So I'll add a new layer and maybe do a hot pink flower here. I have that one. And now I kind of have a small flower in all of my three main colors, which is this pink, the blue, and the yellow. So I think that that should be good enough. Maybe I'll put this other color behind like I did on that other one, just to keep it consistent. And group those. And now each of my flowers, each of my flower groupings on here is its own group on in my file. That's going to help us a lot when we get over to Photoshop. You don't need to flatten everything now. You can if you'd like, but it will actually make it easier if you flatten it over in Photoshop, because then you can manipulate things a little bit more if you need to once you get into Photoshop. So the last thing to do is to hit the little gear, hit share, and do the PSD so we can export this file. And I usually, if I'm connected to my computer or by my computer, I will airdrop it to my computer or wherever you want to save your file so that you can have it on your computer to use in Photoshop. Okay, now I've opened my file in Photoshop and everything that I saw in Procreate is seen here. I have the template turned on. For now, I'm going to turn that off because we're just going to be dealing with the flowers for a little while. So each of these groups is a different group of flowers, but as you can see, these little bounding box squares shows that each of these groups, even though the flower is really small, it shows that it's taking up the entire artboard space. I don't know why Procreate brings in files like this, but it can be kind of annoying. So I'm going to show you how I deal with that. First, I'm going to take each group and right click on the group and merge group. As you can see now, that is a small little square instead of a huge square around the whole artboard. I'm going to do that to each of these groups. Going down, clicking on the group, right clicking, and merge group. Okay, the only one that didn't work for is this last one. The reason for that could be I may have accidentally made a little small mark or something down here at the bottom as I was drawing, and so it thinks that there's extra stuff going on at the bottom. So there is a way we can get rid of all that extra space. I'm going to hit M for the marquee tool on my keyboard, draw a box around that whole flower shape, hit Command-Shift-I, which makes it the inverse of whatever I selected. So I'm selecting everything on the outside of it instead of on the inside, and hit delete. And if I hit Command-D, for deselect, now I can see when I click on that flower grouping, if I hit V to go back to my regular cursor, now that is just a little square. So each of these is on its own layer. You can see all of the icons on the right, and you can see all of your individual flowers. Oh, it looks like this one too might have a little extra space. We're going to do that same thing. Hit the M for the marquee tool, draw a box, Command-Shift-I, delete, Command-D to deselect, and that looks better now. Okay, so now that we have them each separated on their own layer and everything merged together, we're going to drag those into libraries. This is how I like to transfer files from Photoshop to Illustrator back and forth. If you, for some reason, you don't have a version of these programs that offers the libraries through Creative Cloud, you can save these out as individual PNGs, but I'm going to use the library function because it is just so much easier. So I'm going to come up here to the top and go down to the bottom of that drop down menu and hit Create New Library. I'm going to call this Folksy Florals Pattern 1. Hit Create, and now I have a new library to add stuff to. So I'm going to hit V again to get back to my cursor and pull each of these groups of flowers into my library. And it just should show up. Oh, don't want that. Make sure you only click on the flower and pull those into the library. You can't like highlight all of them and drag them all in at once, because if you do that, then it will drag them all in as a full group of icons. Here, I'll show you. Oh, I also don't want the background. I'm going to go ahead and lock the background. So if I highlight all of these and pull them in, it does them as a big group, not as individual flowers. I think that's the same if you pull them in as a group from your layers panel. Yep. So you do have to pull them in individually if you want each of the individual flowers to show up, which is what we want for our pattern in Illustrator. Okay, so that's actually all we need to do in Photoshop. Oh, one last thing is I do like to pull the template also into my library, because I can use that as a place to lay everything out in Illustrator as we go there. So now we're going to head over to Illustrator. Create a new file. I like to do mine at 12 by 12. My reason for this is that most scrapbooking pattern papers are 12 by 12, and I'm familiar with that size of repeat pattern, and so it's easy for me to visualize how big or small the pattern is going to look when printed. If you have a different size you like working at, that's great. Whatever's easiest for you. And then I'll hit Create. Here is my 12 by 12 artboard in Illustrator, and now I'm going to take all those, go to the libraries, all of these icons, I'm going to drag them onto my artboard. I think you may be able to, yes, if you hold Shift and click, you can drag them all in at once so that you don't have to do them each individually. Okay, so now we have all of our little elements, but when you click on it, you can see that it has this X going through it. That means that it's still linking it to that iCloud library. That is okay if you're only planning on using it for yourself and you never plan on deleting that iCloud library. But if you ever need to send this file to somebody else, or if you're working on a computer that isn't your own or something like that, you want to be able to make sure that these images stay embedded in your file. So I'm going to highlight everything I just pulled in, go over to Properties at the top. This is how I have mine laid out. You may have yours differently. And in my quick actions, I have the option of embed. So I'm going to click embed. It will bring up this pop-up. I leave this, all the things that are there as seen, and I click OK. And it's going to prompt me a few times as it goes through each icon. Keep clicking OK. And now when I click on these, you can see that they don't have that X. They're embedded in this file. Even if I deleted that iCloud library now, these would still show up in the file because they're embedded here inside. Oh, but it actually looks like I forgot one of them. Yep, I missed one. So back to Properties, hit Embed, hit OK, and now it's embedded in here. All right, so now we're going to arrange those icons like we had them in Procreate. So I'm going to just drag these into the spots that are close to where I had them before. If you need a refresher, if you can't remember where some of your icons went, you can flip back over to Photoshop, take a peek at where everything was supposed to go, and lay them out that way. Doesn't have to be perfect because we're going to spend some time arranging these in a minute. Okay, everything is somewhat in the place that we want it to be in the final pattern. Before we do anything else, I want to lock this template so that it's not accidentally moving around as I get everything arranged, and I can still use it as kind of a backdrop to place my items on. So I'm going to hit Command 2 and that locks it, and now I can't click or highlight it, it's just going to stay there. Next I'm going to make a square, so go over to this rectangle tool or hit M and drag a square that's about the same size as the one on the template. And I'm going to go over here and change the color of that to not have a fill and to be a black line, just because then it shows up better. And then I'm going to highlight everything except for that, and doing Shift Command bracket will bring all of those other items to the top. Okay, now I can actually get arranging. So as I said before, this one kind of felt like it was floating a little too far away from everything else, so I can scooch that in a bit. This one right here, we were going to copy from this one, so I'm going to pull this down, size it down a bit, maybe rotate it so it's not exactly the same as the one above it. This little flower could be this one. Drag that over and just spend some time filling in just the right and left side. So these sides are actually done. Those are good. Oh, sorry, the right and left sides. The left and top sides. And then I need to also fill in the middle. So I'm going to spend some time filling that middle in right now. As you can already see, I've broken the pattern quite a bit. Some of these flowers that I created just didn't fit as well as I thought they might in some of these spaces. But that's the beauty of these patterns. It's just to get you started. After that, break them all you'd like. I also feel like I need to fill in these sides before I can tell if I need to put a couple more flowers to fill in the gaps. So I'm going to show you how to do that. First, we need to know how big this square is. So it is we look over here at the width, it is 3.014 by 3.014. To make that easier, I'm going to hit the lock and change this to just be 3 inches. That will make it maybe a tiny bit of a different shape than what you drew out, but when we're copying and pasting on either side, having to only type in 3 inches instead of 3.014 will be a lot simpler. So I know I want this flower, and this flower to copy over onto the right side. So I'm going to highlight all of those, hit Command Shift M to move, or you can find it in the drop down, and I want to move them horizontally 3 inches, vertically 0 inches, and I want to make sure I hit copy, not OK. If I hit OK, all of these are just going to move to the other side, but it's going to leave the side they used to be on blank. So we want to copy them. And there they are, copied exactly 3 inches over. And here I can see that this little yellow flower kind of got in the way. So I can adjust that so it's not poking in where it's not supposed to and overlapping. And now I want to do the same thing with the bottom. So I highlight everything that's on the top. That one I think I might want to move over a bit. Same with that one, make any adjustments you need. Highlight those, Command Shift M. This time I want to move it horizontally 0 and vertically 3 inches and copy. Now it's on the bottom as well. And once again, this little yellow flower is kind of in the way, and I can adjust that. And I can also see that this might need to move down a bit. I could use another pink flower over here to fill in that gap. Oops, don't want to move that one. And this is a little tight over here with this pink flower and these other 2 yellow ones. But if I move this blue flower, I need to also move this one. So if I highlight both of them and move them up and down or side to side, they'll stay linked and it won't mess up my repeat pattern. I can make adjustments like that. Same if I want to move these 2, maybe scooch that one in and that one out. I can make those adjustments. And that only applies to ones that are touching the edges of that square. Okay, that is looking pretty good. And now that template behind there is just more distracting than useful. So I'm going to go up to Object, Unlock All, or Command Option 2, and hit Delete. And I don't need that template back there anymore because I have all of my pieces laid out. And the spacing on this actually is looking pretty good. So I think I am ready to make this into a repeat pattern. So the next thing to do when you're creating a repeat pattern is this black box of a square needs to have no stroke and no fill. So I'm going to take off that stroke. So it's a completely clear box and it needs to be behind everything else in the file. So if you hit Command Shift and the left bracket, that will push the box all the way to the back behind everything. Now I'm going to highlight all of the pieces, including that box in the back, go to my swatches panel, and just drag that whole thing into the swatches panel. The way you'll know if you've done it all correctly and nothing's been shifted or bumped out of place is to take that off of your artboard, create a box, make sure you're on the fill, not the stroke, and fill it with your pattern. So when I zoom in here, you can see that it just continues on seamlessly. There's no little breaks or weirdness to any of the flowers. It just continues on seamlessly as if I, copied and pasted it perfectly a million times. So let me show you what it would look like if you did on accident bump one of these flowers. So I'm going to bump this top pink flower up just a little bit so it's not in line anymore with the other ones on the corners. I'm going to highlight all of that, bring it in to the swatches, draw my box, and make sure I click on that second icon, and you can see that just shifted. Now I have this weird little square going through my pattern that's wrong, whereas in my other pattern it was perfect. That one has that weird little spot where it's off. That's how you can tell if something has been shifted. If that does happen, you can go back to your pattern, find which one is the one that's off, delete that, highlight this one, hit that Command Shift M. We're going to move it horizontally -3 since we want it to go to the left instead of to the right. Vertical 0, copy. Now it's copied back in that place. We would once again highlight it, drag it into our swatches, and now when we use that new swatch, it's fixed again. So that's one way to troubleshoot your swatch. Let's say you have one that when you've copied and pasted and you fill your pattern, it looks like that. It looks like you really did take this whole swatch and you repeated it. There's weird space in between and it's just not right. That means that one of your icons is not behind that big square in the back. So if you're not sure which one of those squares or which one of your icons got pulled to the back behind your square, you can highlight everything, make sure you deselect just that square, hit Shift Command right bracket to bring all the icons to the top, highlight everything again, pull it into your swatches panel, and now when you do that new one, it's fixed. So those are a few troubleshooting things if you find that your pattern just isn't looking right and you're confused and frustrated. Another issue you may run into as you're creating patterns is that when you highlight your icons and you drag them into the swatches panel, it just doesn't show up. That's because you may have too big of icons or just too much information that the computer is trying to turn into this pattern swatch. So a way to get around that, I usually like to copy and paste my swatches or my icons and that back square so that I can keep an original that's not edited. And then on my copied one, I deselect the square, so I only have the icon selected, and I go up to Object, Rasterize. I like to keep it at a CMYK, the 300 ppi, but I want a transparent, not a white background. And then I hit OK. Now this is all one big shape instead of individual little icons. Now you can highlight that again so that you have the square highlighted in the background, pull it in, and once again it will create your perfect seamless pattern. That's why I like to keep an original with all the icons separated, just in case I want to change things. Once this has been rasterized, you can't go back unless you undo. So now we have this lovely pattern, and let's say that this seems a bit big for what you want your pattern to be. Sometimes if you just scale it, it will scale, but sometimes your transform is set up so that the pattern stays the same even if the shape is getting smaller. So the way to get around that is to come over to your tools, to the scale tool, or S. So if you hit S and you double click on it, it will bring up this little panel. And in this panel you have the option to transform patterns. If you unclick transform patterns and hit OK, and then hit back to V, and you scale it, now the pattern is staying the same scale even if the shape is a different size. But then if I go back to that scale and click the transform patterns again, hit OK, V, go back to my arrow, now the pattern is scaling. So that is another workaround if you are confused why your pattern isn't scaling as you would like it. As I mentioned earlier, you don't necessarily want to scale this much bigger than you originally had your icons. They may look okay right now in Illustrator, but as you zoom in, you can tell that they're getting more and more pixelated as you zoom them bigger, and you'll be able to tell even more if you print it. So it's best to keep it around the same proportions or smaller as your original icons. Thanks for sticking through to the end. Hopefully this tutorial was able to help you learn not only how to use the Folksy Florals Pattern Starters, but also just how to make a pattern if you want to take your own little icons and things that you've made in Procreate and take them to the end to be a repeat pattern. Let me know in the comments if you have any questions, and I'll see you next time.